WP-Get Webdev tutorials for all user levels. Okay guys, so a bit different for me today. I've realized that my biggest weak point in web development is design. I'm a very technical person, so I've focused very much on making things work, CSS, JavaScript, HTML, performance, all that sort of stuff. But I haven't really spent enough time on design. So my commitment is for the foreseeable future, my number one focus is going to be on learning and getting better at design and understanding design. It's a really, really tough one if it's not your background because there's so many different points of view. The first thing I did is went looking at a bunch of agency or web development websites. And if you do a Google search yourself and look at the first 10 or 15, there's a massive range from very plain and boring all the way through to super flashy, super slick, with beautiful imagery, beautiful animation, and everything in the middle, everything in between. Some are using very, very limited color schemes. Some of them are very colorful. Some are using very large components of fonts, all that stuff. Others aren't. So to try and look at all these and go, okay, what is a good design when you're not a graphic designer is not actually a very easy thing. So I put something up there on the group and I got some feedback, not all positive, which is pretty much what I would expect. And I really, really want to highlight the point that negative feedback is not a bad thing. Negative feedback is actually great because it makes you think and it makes you realize that there are people out there that do know more than you do or do have some better experience, and you can learn from them. And that's exactly the way I take for negative feedback. I mean, that said, simple nasty feedback is never appreciated, but negative feedback telling you the things they don't like or the things that you could do better should always be appreciated. So keep that in mind, guys, and learn from others. That's the best thing that you can do. All right, now, so from my starting point, I started working with Figma yesterday. I did dive into it probably a month ago, had a quick look, was kind of underwhelmed by what it looked like, what it could do, and thinking, well, I can do this in Bricks or Element or directly, why would I use Figma? Revisiting it, it's actually surprising. Under the hood, it's incredibly powerful. It just doesn't look like it when you first look at the UI for Figma. It looks very underwhelming. Small toolbar, not many options. You're used to Photoshop, Illustrator, things like that, with lots of windows and toolbars and that, and you think, well, this is really underwhelming. The reality is, under the hood, there is an awful lot going on, and I think the developers of Figma have done an incredible job making a very capable tool looking very, very simple. And it is very, very simple when you start understanding it. So what I wanted to do is look at a couple of things that I need to master to start with. The first one is my colors. What a world of difference that is when you look at different people's opinions, different websites, and trying to work out what kind of color should I be using. You use colors and people tell you they're horrible, or other people will tell you they love them. It's confusing. It's absolutely confusing. Fortunately, there are some very, very simple rules to get started. And the rule that I'm focusing on right now is what's commonly known as the 60-30-10 rule. And it's as simple as picking a primary color. And this is the first thing that stumped me was I'm thinking primary color as being like your brand color or something colorful. Where the reality is, when you're looking at design, what people are referring to as a primary is the most dominant color that you're going to see on that page. And that can be black, white, gray, It doesn't need to be green or blue or red or whatever, unless that suits your design. So in this case, I've picked just a very light grey for my primary. If we look at this, and this is just mock-up stuff that I'm using to learn at the moment, so don't judge the design because it's just about learning. And all of the background here is that light grey. Some of these titles here are the light grey, you probably can't tell on there. So my primary of a light grey takes up the fair majority of this page. So it's using roughly 60% of the page. The secondary. Now, I've actually expanded on this a little bit from what I first saw with the 60-30-10 rule. So actually, to make this simple, what I've done is I've made this primary here, the P there, that grey, 600 pixels wide. Okay, I've then got my secondary and I've gone 300 pixels wide, and then my accent is 100 pixels wide. So 60, 30, 10. Okay, what I've then done, I've realised that sometimes you need to have variations on your secondaries and your accents. So I've divided these two, so that's 300 wide there. I've divided that to a 150 and 150, a 50 and a 50. So the first colours I focus on is my primary, my secondary, my accent, and then I create some slight variations of those depending on the design. Okay, so you're with me so far? So there's my starting colour guide. And I should show you, when I go into these, if I have a look over on my right hand side here, I'm using styles for these. And I'll show you why I do that. So if I go to my second one, so I'm using my secondary style, secondary variation, accent variation, and I'll show you why I do that. So there's my colours that I decide on. And if we look here, my secondary variation is used down here on this card title. It just works in with that. So the secondary is the background, the variation is this line right here. My accent color, main accent color is used for my primary button here. It's also used as a outline on this button or a border. And my accent variation is used here for a second alternate button. Okay, and then down in here I've used my accent for this line, and you can see my buttons there. So that's pretty much what the colors do. Now, if we go to the main document, so clicking anywhere outside of a artboard, you can see the main design document here, and you can see I've created some text styles. Now these text styles will be identical to the names that I give them in Elementor or Bricks. Let's just talk about Elementor. So the names that I give these fonts that I create as custom fonts in Elementor. So just a quick one on that. What I did note is that when you put in values into Figma, it's always pixels. It seems like it's always pixels. And if you just put 150 into the line height, it doesn't work. You've got to specify that that's a percentage. So what I'm working with is in my web pages, I work with REM with the base font size being 16 pixels. So everything is a division or multiplication of 16. So if I want a large font size, so for example the 80, I bring up my calculator and I bring up my 16, which is 1 REM. Let's multiply that by 5 times, but maybe I want to be 5 times the size. That's 80 pixels. Okay, so in Figma, if I want 5 REM sizing, I will put 80 in as my size. In Elementor, I will put that down as 5 REM. Okay, so that's the first thing that was just a slightly different. The line height, you can put in the CSS as 1.5. Okay, so 150% is 1.5. So what I can do, once I've defined these fonts, I just then bring up my second monitor with Elementor, go to my fonts, okay, grab my extra bold, large, so that's going to be Poppins, it's going to be the extra bold, and it's going to be 5 REM with a 1.5 line height. All right, and just go through each of those, update Elementor. Same with my colors. So I've got these colors here defined as global colors in Elementor. So all I have to do, grab that value, copy that, paste it into my color in Elementor. And with my secondary, grab this value here, paste that in as my secondary in Elementor. And then what I'll do in Elementor is I'll have a similar sort of a layout ready to go as a starter. Then all I need to do is change the font and color values, and most of my design is already started. Okay, and then it's just a matter of tweaking from that point on there. So it's a real workflow process to speed things up. And what you're doing is that you're using Figma for quick changes, looking at how it looks, making things look a bit different, and then it's a very, very quick transition to Elementor just by using these global fonts and colors that are exactly the same naming in Elementor. Okay, so there's my first thing. Okay, now I'm going to just zoom in a little bit on this so I can see a bit more of the page, show you where this gets really cool with these colors by using the styles. So let's say, for example, I want to change my 30 color, my 30% color, so my secondary. Go over to my fonts, my colors, select it. And let's say I want to use a base starting from my orange in my logo here. There we go. There's my secondary color. See, it's changed in my color guide up here. It's changed everywhere that I've used it. I wouldn't use that because I've got a white or a light gray primary. This isn't going to work too well against that. Maybe in some designs it would. So maybe you might want to make that more of a kind of a burnt orange and then change all your colors to do with that. So depends on your logo and your branding. So with this one, I'm just going to back that right off so it's kind of more of a dark, like almost a brown. Okay, grab that color value and copy it. Go over to my secondary variation, paste it in there, hit the enter key. Now my secondary variation is the same. Now what you'll see is on my cards here, I can't see that line. If I go into my secondary variation, I'll brighten this up a bit. Here we go, you can see it coming up over here. Maybe I want that a little bit more. So there's my secondary variation. All right, so I can see that in my card. Now if I look up at my color guide, I've got my secondary and secondary variation. So how cool is that? Right, now this kind of green doesn't go too well with that, does it? So let's go to my accent. And I'm going to use my picker again. And I'm going to start with the orange again. I'm going to use that as my accent. Maybe that is what I want, the orange. Maybe I want it to be a bit different. You can change it there. All right, so let's grab that. Copy that. Go to my accent variation. Paste it in there. Press the enter key. Now my variation and accent are the same. Let's say we want to darken that. Oh, sorry, lighten that. Got a lighten variation there. And we can see the button change. Or maybe we want to darken it. We want a darker variation. So like that. It's kind of a burnt orange. So you can see just by setting this up as my template and using these styles, all I have to do, look at my branding, look at my colors, pick some colors out of that, change a few of these, have a look at my style guide up here, my color guide. Am I happy with that? How does that look on actual content? Colors done. Colors are done as quickly as that. Now, it's consistent. It uses a very simple formula. Once you've done this, then you can break the rules and you can go into it and maybe change some things, add another color if you feel you need to. But it's a great starting point, which is something I didn't have before, and I'm glad to have this new found thinking. All right. So that's the colors that just really, really make sense to me now. Now we're going to look at sizing and layout. And this was a really, really difficult one because of so many different opinions out there. And I looked at, for example, when we look at a standard desktop, like if I went into my frames and I add a desktop, My standard desktop here is 1440 by 1024. Not too worried about the height, so the 1440 is the thing that we want. Now, what I'm generally seeing on designs is that in most cases when you've got a box layout, we're looking at, in most cases I'm seeing 1140, right? So, and this is a good point here. So if I go into my desktop here, I'm just going to quickly enable my grids that I've set up with the, whoops, well, I've got a frame. If I go back into my desktop here and do a Shift G, not sure what it'll be on a Mac, I'm on a PC, I can see the grids that I've set up. I've got a 12 column grid, vertical grid, and I'm going to head over to it and have a look at it. So my 12 column vertical grid, I've got set to 12. I've got a 150 margin, which puts it on each side. So the 150 margin, so that's 300 total. So the 1440 minus the 300 is 1140. So my box in the middle here is 1140. And the reason we do that is because we want to see in our design, what does the box content look like and what does the stuff that extends beyond the box content look like. So this is a full width section that's going to grow depending on the size of your screen. This stuff in the middle here is going to stay within that 1140 box. Okay, so here was the first confusing thing that I found, is that I'm seeing a lot of reference to 8 pixel or 16 pixel grids. Now, 1140 does not divide by 8. So if I just go in and set up a grid in here, whoops, wrong one. If I add a grid and I make that 8 pixel grid, all right, this grid does not line up with the 1140. So you end up with some really, really weird spacing. And if I have a look at, for example, if I look at these vertical bars compared to the grid, see, they don't line up. None of it lines up properly. So it's like, well, what is this 8 pixel grid and how do you do that when you're talking about vertical spacing? I then realized that with modern web design where you've got flexbox and flexible layouts, it doesn't matter. It's really only the spacing between your elements that gives you that visual, I guess, consistency. So the actual width of your element, for example, this here, if I'm looking at a card, the actual width of that element does not really matter. It does not have to fit an 8 pixel or 16 pixel grid, but the spacing between that one and the next one should. That's just a view that I've formed. Okay, and then the way there, if we then use the 8 pixel grid for the vertical spacing, then our horizontal and vertical gaps are going to match. All right, so I'm going to get rid of this grid because I don't use that because it does not work for this design. Okay, so I found a video which I've already referenced in another comment, but I might just reference it again. It's a great reference from an Australian guy who's come up with a different idea, which is this grid here. So what you do is you add a row grid, as many as you like, doesn't matter, it's just going to go vertically. We don't want to stretch, we just want them to go to the top. We want to set the height of these to 8 and the gutter to 0. So we don't want any spacing between them. We want every one of them to be 8 pixels high. And what we end up with, you can see here, we've got this horizontal lines, which is that grid that I just mentioned there. I'll show you what happens. I'll actually just add a text element for, actually I'll add a box. I'm just going to add a box to the screen here. And you can see as I'm moving, it's snapping. I might zoom in a little bit more so you can see that. So if I was to change the size of that, it's snapping to my 8 pixel vertical grid. See that there? So everything I do is going to be divisible by 8. Right? Even if I move. So if I want this to be 24 pixels away from the top one, actually I'll just grab another one. I'm going to copy that. And I want that to be 24 pixels. There we go. We can see we've got 3 vertical grid lines. horizontal grid lines. And that spacing is 24 pixels from that one to that one. So now what I've also done, sorry, I should say on the 12 column grid, it defaults to 20, Elemental defaults to 20 as well. I thought, look, I want consistent vertical and horizontal, so I'm defaulting my gutter to 24 pixels, so that if you look at the center here, that's a 24 pixel by 24 pixel square. So it's 24 pixels that way and 24 that way. All right, so that's my grid that I've come up with, and through other people's advice, I shouldn't say I've come up with, that I've decided on. And I'm loving the fact that once you set this up, all you have to do to hide it is press Shift-G on a PC. I don't know what it'd be, Option or Command G on a Mac. But like every other application, all you have to do is point your mouse at these menu bars. That's the view. And in this case here, layout grids is Shift-G. So whatever, if you're on a Mac, whatever it says that is, that's your keyboard shortcut. All right, so one last thing, and this is actually in the video that I mentioned, is over here, I've got a mobile layout, which has actually got the wrong, started working on that. Going to get rid of that there. So if I come back to my desktop layout and I go to my grids here, see I've got these, as I move my mouse to the left hand side, it's very hard to see. You get a hand and it's like a little bar icon. I click on that and then shift click on the other one. Now I've selected these two grids, and I know on Mac it's Command V. I'm going to do Command C, sorry. I'm going to do Control C because I'm on Windows. So I've actually copied these two grids into memory. They go to my artboards here for my frame, I should say, used to Illustrator for the iPhone 13, and I do a Control V or Command V on Mac. I've now got my grid there. Look here, and I see my 12 column. You make that a 4 column. Something strange going on here. I'm not seeing it properly on there. What's going on? Ah, my margin. Get rid of my margin. So I'll probably set a margin to maybe 20 pixels on that. Okay, so I want it 20 from the sides. Actually, let's make it 15. I think that's probably more commonly 15. So we've got 15 from the sides. Then we've got our 4 column layout grid, and we've still got our 8 pixel vertical grid. Okay, so if I wanted something on here, that is a rectangle, and I want it to be 2 columns wide. There we go. So let's start from there. Okay, so now I've got, why is that 161? Sort of 160, there we go. Sometimes just moving the edges, you can easily fix these up, okay? So I want one there, so I've got a 24 pixel margin there, or gap I should say. So let me grab, oops, I'm gonna grab that and do an Alt, and I want that to be 24 pixels away. I've got 3 vertical grid lines there. If I want this one to be 24 pixels away, I just grab that and stick it there. Now if I zoom in, perfect. I've now got 4 bars, or 4 boxes that are all 24 pixels vertically and horizontally spaced. And all I've done is set up my grid once, copied and pasted my grid from my frame. I get used to the wording. I'm used to artboards. So from my desktop frame, I copied my grid, copied it onto my iPhone frame, went into the columns, just changed my column count to 4 and my side margins to 15. Set up, ready to go. How cool is that? Now, I am just so impressed by Figma, and I think this just makes things so quick. That's the thing about anything to do with processes and web development. The things that you can do that make your processes quicker and more accurate at the same time are just gold. And I think I'm really happy with the fact that I'm now using this, or will be using this very simple color formula, very simple grid system, and then I can easily translate that into Elementor or whatever other page builder I'm going to use. So I'm going to end this here because that was a lot longer than I expected to take, but I hope you guys get some value out of this and get into Figma. If you're a web dev and you haven't focused on design, it is extremely important, because there's no point in being great at things technically and great at building widgets when they don't look great. So focus on the design. I wish, if I could go back in time, my number one thing is I wish I would have focused on design first and then learn the technical sides of it. So all you graphic designers out there, you're in leaps and bounds ahead of the rest of us. All right, so I'll leave it here. If you like this kind of thing, please hit subscribe, please hit the like, and feel free to ask me any questions. Thank you.